and you'll maximise the potential of every car, allowing you to get better stage times and challenge for championship victories. Weight transfer is the core component that most aspects of rally driving revolve around. That is, the inertia of the car's weight as it changes direction. This is the force that makes your body move as the car brakes, accelerates and turns. Weight transfer affects the amount of mechanical pressure applied by each of the 4 tyres against the road surface. When a car speeds up, slows down or turns, each tyre will experience a difference in that mechanical pressure compared to when the car is stationary. This results in an increase or decrease of the potential grip available. Braking and accelerating produces longitudinal weight transfer, and turning produces lateral weight transfer. It can also be influenced by other factors, such as the road surface, jumps and crests. Always try and manage the weight transfer at the moment it's required, whether accelerating, braking or turning. This will maximise the grip potential of each tyre, keeping you flowing in and out of sections throughout a stage. It is important to bear this basic principle in mind as you watch these guides, as almost all these techniques are used to manage weight transfer. Like an aeroplane, rally cars move in 3 axes: roll, pitch, and yaw. Rally cars are known for performing big slides. Most of the time, these slides are induced by the driver to achieve as high a speed through a corner as possible without sliding off the road. In order to traverse a rally stage quickly and without crashing, you must manage the attitude of the car at all times. In rallying, the racing line means the same as in any other form of motorsport. That is, to straighten the track as much as possible through corners. However, unlike some other forms of motorsport where drivers use every inch of the track to find the perfect racing line, rally drivers have only one shot at each corner, so they often leave a small margin for error. As a rally stage undulates through forests or curves around mountains, it is not always possible to see the racing line. Accurate pace notes are vital so that you know where to place the car on the road even if the section ahead is not immediately visible. You should also listen out for obstacles such as gate posts or piles of logs that may cause you to take a slightly different line through a corner than you otherwise would. When you're out on stage, make sure you listen to your co-driver and position your car appropriately for the road ahead. Always try and allow a small margin for error. When you hear drivers talking about maximum attack, they are talking about when they are pushing as hard as they can to get the most out of the car. This often leads to some of the most spectacular moments in rallying as drivers set stage records or push too far and have an event-ending crash. Knowing when to push and when to be conservative are vital when competing in an event. If you're recovering from a mechanical issue and you're trying to make up time to the rest of the field, it may be a valid strategy to push harder as you have very little to lose. If you're in the top 3 and setting competitive stage times, it may be more sensible to take a conservative approach and avoid any big risks. In reality, drivers often take a measured approach, driving at 95% of their full potential so as not to make any big mistakes while still maintaining a competitive pace. In dirt rally, this measured approach is advisable as you get to grips with your car and how it responds to the stages and the conditions. If the front wheels of a car lose traction with the road surface while attempting to steer, the car enters a state known as understeer. Understeer is always bad and never intentionally used in any rally driving technique. In fact, some of these techniques are used specifically to avoid understeer. Understeer occurs if traction has been partially lost. The car will continue to corner, but at less of an angle than the direction of the front wheels. The car will feel like it is pushing forward. In this situation, applying more steering angle often makes the situation worse, as doing so requires even more traction than was initially being asked of the front tyres. If the wheels have entirely lost traction, The car will cease turning and will slide in the direction it was travelling before the wheels locked. This is particularly common while steering under heavy braking, as the traction of the tyre is being used partly to slow the car down and partly to turn. The correct response is to stop any input to the brake and accelerator and reduce the steering angle. This allows the weight of the car to settle and traction to be regained. On loose surfaces such as gravel and snow, there is an increased chance of understeer due to the reduced level of grip, so techniques are often used to induce oversteer to prevent the car from understeering in the first place. Front-wheel drive cars are particularly prone to understeer as all braking, accelerating and turning forces go through the front tyres. Understeer can occur while accelerating if the combined forces of accelerating and steering overcome the traction available. A similar loss of traction can occur due to braking and steering. Rear-wheel drive cars are least prone to understeer as the front tyres are only used to brake and turn. In fact, their characteristics are more prone to oversteer. Four-wheel drive cars tend to exhibit the characteristics of front-wheel drive cars under braking on corner entry and rear-wheel drive cars under acceleration on corner exit. Rally teams work hard to reduce these characteristics and give a more balanced setup. Remember, understeer is always bad. When rally driving, make sure you try and avoid it at all costs. If the rear wheels of a car lose traction with the road surface while attempting to steer, the car enters a state known as oversteer. This is when the angle of the car exceeds that of the steering input and the rear of the car steps out of line with the front. Unlike understeer, oversteer is often used as a technique to increase the speed at which corners can be taken. By proactively eliminating understeer, a higher exit speed can be achieved. How oversteer is induced and controlled depends on the type of drivetrain in the car. By definition, front-wheel drive cars do not have any drive to the rear wheels. Therefore, oversteer cannot be induced by applying the throttle, but can be induced by using weight transfer. Once a front-wheel drive car enters oversteer, the attitude of the car can be controlled by steering with opposite lock, accelerating, decelerating, or braking. Applying opposite lock while accelerating will effectively speed up the front of the car and will bring the rear of the car back in line. If more oversteer is required, for example if the corner is tighter than expected, decelerating or braking will increase the amount of oversteer by maintaining the weight over the front wheels and therefore reducing the grip on the rear. As the rear wheels of a four-wheel drive vehicle are powered, you can also induce and maintain oversteer by using the throttle to spin the wheels. Depending on the ratio of power delivery between front and rear wheels, the car may have a tendency to oversteer more or less on corner exit. If the ratio is biased towards the front, under acceleration the car may pull itself out of oversteer. However, if the ratio is biased toward the rear, applying power may increase oversteer by spinning the rear wheels. Subtle control of the steering, throttle and brake is used to initiate, maintain and exit oversteer, and the same weight shifting techniques apply to four-wheel drive as for front-wheel drive cars. Unlike front and four-wheel drive cars, rear-wheel drive cars require the opposite technique with regard to throttle control during oversteer. Oversteer can be induced and maintained by weight transfer, but also by applying power to break the traction of the rear wheels. Once oversteer has been initiated, continuing to apply power will maintain the slide. In order to limit or correct oversteer, throttle input must be reduced. Lift-off oversteer occurs when, during cornering, you lift off the throttle. Because the car is slowed by engine braking, there will be a certain amount of longitudinal weight transfer which will unload the rear tyres, causing them to partially lose traction with the road. In a front-wheel drive car, this weight transfer alone is enough to induce oversteer, because the front of the car is usually heavier than the rear. In four-wheel drive and rear-wheel drive cars, although the difference in the static weight between the front and rear may not be as great as a front-wheel drive car, the effect is amplified by engine braking also acting on the rear wheels as they are unloaded by the weight transferring forward. The key thing to remember is that oversteer is used as a technique to increase the speed at which corners can be taken. You may be tempted to try and avoid using the brakes as much as possible, but there are two separate and equally important uses for the brakes in a rally car. The most obvious use is to slow down to a speed at which the car can take the next corner without crashing. The second, less obvious reason is to manage weight transfer before, during, or even after cornering. Applying the brakes transfers more of the weight of the car over the front wheels, pressing the tyres against the road, giving them increased grip. The trade-off is that the rear tyres have less of the car's weight applied to them, resulting in less grip. Slowing the car down should only be done while the car is moving in a straight line. All four wheels don't need to be pointing forward, but the direction of travel should be as straight as possible. You should apply the maximum braking force without the front wheels locking. Depending on the corner you're approaching, you may need to partially lock the rear wheels to induce oversteer. Judging braking points correctly allows you to brake smoothly and continuously until the turn-in point, where you can release the brake and turn for the corner. Releasing the brake at the turn-in point means that the weight will have already been transferred to the front wheels when you turn, giving increased traction. You must always take the characteristics of the car and the road into account when braking. As well as the level of grip and characteristics of the road, many other factors can affect weight transfer. This can load or unload each tyre, affecting the amount of grip available and the distance required to slow down. Some examples are as follows. When travelling uphill, the effect of gravity working against the car results in shorter braking distances. The opposite is true when travelling downhill. When braking on a loose surface, reduced grip results in longer braking distances. The level of grip is often variable from corner to corner, so it is usually prudent to leave a margin for error. When braking on clean, dry tarmac, you will have shorter braking distances. As there is generally more grip, the car will tend to remain more stable than on loose surfaces. Conditions such as wet weather, mud on the road or ice will result in longer braking distances. The overall weight of the car has a dramatic effect. Heavier cars take much longer to slow down than lighter cars. If the wheels are inadvertently locking during braking, the wheels will slide across the surface rather than slowing the car down. So remember, use the brakes to slow the car down to a speed at which it can take the next corner without crashing, and to manage weight transfer before, during, or after cornering. Always be aware of the road conditions and adjust your braking distances accordingly. The term left foot braking is often misunderstood as simply using your left foot rather than your right foot to operate the brake pedal. While that fact is true, it only scratches the surface in explaining the technique. If braking, accelerating and steering are the tools used to manage weight transfer, left foot braking is the tool for fine adjustment. Using your left foot on the brake pedal and your right foot on the accelerator has a number of advantages. The amount of time taken between pressing the accelerator and brake pedals is significantly reduced compared to using your right foot only. This means that fractions of a second are saved every time you swap from accelerating to braking and back again. If you apply a small amount of brake force while accelerating, particularly in a front-wheel drive car, the load that the engine and drivetrain has to work against causes the differential to tighten. This spreads the power across both wheels, making it less likely to spin one of those wheels due to low grip, therefore giving you more driving traction out of corners. Weight transfer can be fine-tuned mid-corner by adjusting the amount of brake force versus the amount of throttle applied. A little more brake input transfers weight forward, giving more traction on the front wheels to help the car turn in. A little more throttle corrects oversteer if the car is sliding too much. The car can be balanced at the edge of traction throughout a corner using this method. Brake balance adjustment can be used in conjunction with left foot braking to tune the balance between understeer and oversteer. Some of these principles still apply if you use your right foot on the brake, but clearly the speed at which you can move between pedals becomes a factor. Cars that require the clutch to be engaged in order to change gear usually prevent the use of left foot braking for slowing the car down from high speed. However, the technique can still be applied through a corner. Remember, left foot braking allows you to quickly switch between acceleration and braking and is a fantastic technique for fine-tuning the weight transfer of the car. Tyres operate at their optimum with a certain amount of wheel spin. On gravel, wheel spin lets the tread of the tyre move the loose material on the road surface and puts the tyre in contact with the harder surface underneath, where the most grip can be found. However, excessive wheel spin prevents the tyres from achieving their maximum grip potential, and so it's not always appropriate to floor the accelerator. The technique used to combat excessive wheel spin is known as feathering the throttle and is used primarily when exiting a corner to achieve maximum grip and therefore acceleration. Instead of using the accelerator pedal as an on-off switch, you can modulate the throttle input to find the most grip. The amount of throttle input required to do this will vary from surface to surface and even from corner to corner, so it is more a case of feeling for the grip than knowing exactly how much throttle to apply. As with braking, the inclination of the road ahead has an impact on the speed at which a car can accelerate. When travelling uphill, the car has to pull its weight against gravity and will accelerate more slowly than on a flat surface. Travelling downhill will allow the car to accelerate more quickly. Perhaps less obvious is the effect of altitude on the car. At high altitude, such as the mountain ranges that rally stages and hill climbs often traverse, the car will have relatively less power than at lower altitude. Engines need air to burn fuel, and so if more air goes in, more fuel can go in and more power can be produced. As the air density reduces with altitude, power output also reduces. Bear this in mind when you are driving up Pikes Peak, as the change in altitude is one of the most dramatic in motorsport. As with braking, weight transfer is an extremely important aspect of making a rally car turn. Simply turning the steering wheel does not guarantee that the car will move in the desired direction. As a driver, you must ensure that the weight is transferred to the correct place at the correct time. In general, the weight should be transferred to the outside front wheel relative to the direction of the corner. Braking places the weight of the car over the front wheels, but other factors should be considered, such as the current attitude of the car and the characteristics of the road. The current attitude of the car will vary depending on the section of road ahead. Two corners in the same direction will mean that the weight will already be in the correct place to take the second corner after the first. With two corners in opposite directions, you will have to make sure that the weight is transferred to the other front wheel after the first corner before the car will change direction for the second. The rate at which the weight transfers in any direction is dependent on the surface, the available grip, and the setup of the car. In sequences of corners that change direction, you can use the pendulum effect to help the car change direction from one corner to the next. Crests, jumps, dips, and other obstacles can all destabilize the car and stop you from transferring the weight to the correct wheel, and so these factors need to be taken into account. Making sure that the weight is transferred to the correct place at the right time is one of the most important aspects of rally driving, so make sure you keep this in mind at all times. There is a common misconception that to drive a rally car quickly, you need to wrestle the steering wheel one way, then the other, as much as possible. When you turn the steering wheel, you are transferring the weight of the car to the wheels on the side where it's needed to load the suspension and provide traction for turning. If you rapidly move the weight from one side to the other, it is likely to destabilize the car, making it difficult to control. Continuing the soaring action on the steering wheel will progressively make the situation worse until either a crash or a spin has occurred. When cornering or making corrections to the steering, you should apply the minimum amount of steering necessary. In conjunction with other techniques, such as left foot braking to induce oversteer, the amount of steering input necessary may be considerably lower than would be required for the same angle corner in a road car. As well as keeping the car as stable as possible, using the minimum amount of steering takes the least time to apply and then remove. Consider a situation where the car unexpectedly and significantly oversteers. If you were to apply a lot of opposite lock, it may correct the situation. However, the rear wheels may suddenly grip, snapping the car out of oversteer, and you may have to rapidly unwind the opposite lock in order to prevent the car from transferring into oversteer in the other direction. Excessive steering lock would only serve to make this situation more difficult to control. So remember, always try to use the minimum amount of steering input possible in conjunction with other techniques to make sure the car remains as stable as possible. The handbrake turn is used in rallying more than in any other form of motorsport. The aim of performing a handbrake turn is to get the car to dramatically oversteer at relatively low speed, which enables a tighter turn to be taken than using the steering axis of the wheels only. Weight shift is still required, and you must use the momentum of changing direction with the steering in conjunction with the handbrake to get the rear of the car to slide. The handbrake can also be used to induce oversteer in a more open corner if there is insufficient traction on the front wheels to get the car to turn in at the required point. Remember, handbrake turns are used to navigate very tight corners such as hairpins that would be difficult or slow to drive around normally, so listen out for these types of corners in the pace notes. Pendulum turns are probably the most advanced technique used in rally driving. They are essentially the culmination of all the techniques we have described in these guides. They are used specifically to prevent the car from understeering on loose surfaces when approaching sharp turns or hairpins at relatively high speed. The technique works by using the momentum of the rear of the car swinging from one direction to the other. It must be timed correctly so that the final weight shift happens at the turning point for a corner. Modern rally teams put a lot of effort into reducing their car's tendency to understeer, so pendulum turns are not used as much in today's cars as they were with the classics. In order to explain the process, here are the inputs you should make and the effect it will have on the car at each point during a pendulum turn. In this example, the car is travelling at high speed on a straight piece of gravel road and has to make a 90-degree turn. As you arrive at the braking point, you get hard on the brakes to slow the car down and shift the weight of the car forward. With increased grip on the front wheels, flick the steering wheel in the opposite direction of the corner. The reduced weight over the rear wheels will put the car into oversteer, with the rear of the car stepping out and the front of the car pointing away from the corner. You can now increase your throttle input, reduce your braking input, and steer in the direction of the corner before modulating all three inputs. This allows you to maintain the oversteer until the point at which the car needs to turn in for the corner. It's worth noting that the lateral grip of the tyre combined with some braking input causes the car to rapidly decelerate, as if braking hard in a straight line. Now release the brake pedal and feather the throttle. This will snap the car out of oversteer in the initial direction. The momentum of the weight shift of the rear of the car coupled with the acceleration and steering input, will initiate oversteer in the direction of the corner. At the turning point, apply full throttle and move the steering wheel in the same direction as the rear of the car. This is the pendulum part. You want the car to oversteer in the direction of the corner to help eliminate understeer. Now feather the throttle as the car is switching from oversteer one way to the other. You must move the steering wheel in the same direction in order to catch the second slide. You will now have oversteer through the corner. Keep feathering the throttle and control the oversteer with opposite lock. A perfect Scandinavian flick will see you hitting the apex and accelerating through the corner exit where the car is straight once more. Remember, this is an advanced technique and practice makes perfect. The advantage is that by deliberately using the momentum of the rear of the car, you can actively prevent the car from understeering into a tight corner. One of the most unique aspects of rallying, unlike other forms of motorsport, is that you have to contend with many kinds of road surfaces. With varying surface types and conditions come varying grip levels. Tarmac, concrete, gravel, dirt, ice and snow and their many variations are all surfaces you will have to get to grips with. While you will be given the most suitable tyres for the conditions in dirt rally, it is important to understand their characteristics. Not to be confused with the camber that is associated with suspension geometry, camber of the road surface should be taken into account, particularly when cornering. Positive camber, where the road is sloped towards the inside of the corner, can help the car maintain traction and higher cornering speeds can be achieved. Adverse camber, where the road surface is sloped away from the inside of the corner, tries to force the car away from the apex and the racing line, so lower speeds are often required. Although most corners have positive camber, a series of corners changing from one direction to the other, where the camber of the road also changes, can be challenging, and you must ensure that the car gets out of the apex of one corner, over the crown of the centre of the road, and into the apex of the next corner. In some extreme cases, the camber is so severe that the car will jump across the road as it moves from one side to the other. Make sure you place the car in the correct position on the road so that you are making the most of the camber. Jumps are often the most spectacular part of any rally stage, but you must consider several factors when approaching them. Firstly, since the wheels of the car will not be in contact with the ground for a period of time, you'll be unable to change direction or slow down while airborne. This sounds like an obvious point, but it means that you must ensure that the car leaves the ground with the correct attitude and correct speed in order to land in the correct place. If the road is straight, then it might simply be a case of making sure the car leaves the road while also pointing straight. But if the jump happens to be in the middle of a corner, you'll need to ensure that the trajectory of the car will land back on the road. This is particularly important when there are ditches, rocks, trees or other obstacles lining the side of the stage. Weight transfer also plays an important role when approaching a jump. Depending on the nature of the road either side of the jump, there may be a need to slow down or even brake before it. Imagine approaching a jump at high speed, which has a sharp corner immediately after it. You would need to brake before the jump to reduce the speed, which would transfer the weight of the car over the front wheels. In general, it is advisable not to have the car in this attitude as it leaves the ground over a jump, as it would be likely to nosedive and land hard on the front, which could result in damage to the sump, radiator or suspension. Instead, you should brake up to the lip of the jump, but stop braking just before you take off to move the weight back to the centre of the car. In some cars, especially front-wheel drive or other cars that are nose-heavy, it may even be prudent to be accelerating as the car leaves the ground. Doing this will transfer the weight to the rear just before takeoff, which will further help prevent the car from nosediving. Remember, Even though big jumps at high speeds can be spectacular, taking them at the highest speed possible may not be the quickest way to tackle a jump. The longer a car is airborne, the more it slows down, so you should consider taking a jump at a slightly lower speed to get the wheels back on the ground as soon as possible. Although seemingly innocuous, crests can dramatically impact the stability of the car. Even if the car doesn't leave the ground as it would over a jump, a crest can often cause the car to go light and unload the suspension and tyres, resulting in reduced traction. This is particularly important if the crest is immediately before, during or after a corner, and this should be taken into account when approaching them. The other thing to consider is that depending on their size, they can prevent you from seeing the road ahead. Again, this is particularly important if the crest is immediately before a corner. Imagine approaching a crest which you cannot see over at high speed that is immediately before a slight corner. It is essential that you put the car in the correct place on the road and at the right attitude to take the corner, even though the corner cannot be seen until the last second. Bumps can also unload the suspension and tyres, reducing traction by flicking the front, rear or one side of the car upward. Rally stages are usually uneven surfaces, but particularly bad bumps that unsettle the car or require you to do something different than you otherwise would are often called out in the pace notes. Bumps don't always stretch across the entire width of the road, and so evasive action may be necessary, such as moving to one side of the road. Dips or other compressions in the road surface can be unpredictable and should be treated with caution. Dips that occur over a long distance may not have too big an impact on the car, but those that are shorter can act like a severe bump, as the suspension is compressed and then rapidly extended, causing the car to be flicked into the air. Extra caution needs to be taken when traversing extremely rough terrain, with many bumps and dips that can unsettle the car. Care should also be taken when crossing water splashes, as they can, like dips and bumps, be unpredictable. Depending on the depth of water and the width of the crossing, the approach may change from flat out to slowing right down and just driving through it at a normal road speed. Hitting deep water at high speed can damage the front of the car, so it is often better to lose a few seconds by slowing down than losing minutes with mechanical damage. Remember, this is why bumps, dips and water splashes are called out in your pace notes, and where listening to your co-driver is extremely important. There are many types of obstacles that may be encountered on a rally stage. On a gravel stage through a forest, it is not uncommon to come across logs, branches or large rocks. Rally cars have strong sump guards and other underbody protection, and in gravel setup, the suspension travel and tough tyres allow the car to drive over most obstacles. Evasive action may need to be taken if the obstacle is large enough to damage the car or cause a crash. Lower suspension setups with shorter travel and lower profile tyres like those used in tarmac rallies mean that more care must be taken when making the split-second decision to drive over or around obstacles. Fixed obstacles such as gate posts, bridge parapets and cattle grids often require consideration and are therefore included in the pace notes with sufficient description to allow the driver to pass them safely. Make sure you are prepared to take the necessary precautions to avoid a rally-ending incident when you hear these obstacles called out. Unlike a race circuit where drivers learn every inch of the track, rally drivers tackle hundreds of kilometres of unique road during every rally. And so in order to be fast and safe, they use pace notes. Not all pace notes are the same. Which system is used and what features of the road are called out are down to driver preference and can vary greatly from one driver to the next. There are many variations of co-driver systems used, but in Dirt Rally we use 6 to 1, made famous by the legendary man himself, Colin McRae. In this system, 6 is the fastest, least severe corner, and 1 is a slow, almost 90-degree corner. We then have square, hairpin and acute to describe even tighter corners. There is a general misconception that the number relates to the gear you should be in, but this isn't always the case. If you come out of a right 2 in second gear immediately into a left 6, you are unlikely to change straight into 6th gear. Distances are generally given in meters, for example 60, 80 or 100, unless the corners are really close together, in which case and or into may be used. Additional description of detail in the road ahead is also necessary. Calls such as care, caution and double caution signify sections where extra care should be taken. Descriptions such as open, tighten or double tighten are used when the angle of the corner changes midway through. Corner length is also described using half long, long or continues for. Crests, bumps and jumps, as well as other variations that you can drive through such as bad camber, dips and water splashes are also called out. Perhaps the most important calls of all are those telling you when an obstacle is present, meaning that you should avoid cutting the corner or running wide on corner exit. In these situations, the co-driver will call "don't cut." It is vitally important that you listen to your co-driver and don't cut in these situations. Another important aspect of pace notes is the timing. This is the point at which the co-driver delivers the note to you, relative to the position on the road. Again, this is down to preference, but it is common for the pace notes to be delivered 1 or 2 corners ahead of where the car is on the road. This allows you to build up a mental picture of the road ahead, so that you can put the car in the correct attitude at the correct time to achieve maximum speed. While some drivers prefer pace notes to be delivered later than others, it is critical that you are given each note before the point at which you would need to react to them. The most obvious example of that would be a braking point for a corner. If the pace note is given to you after the point at which you would need to brake, particularly for a corner that cannot be seen on approach, this is a late note. Many crashes in rallying have been caused by the co-driver not giving the driver the pace note in time. If you want to, you can adjust the co-driver call timing in the player preferences menu so that the calls are delivered with the timing that suits you.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, 40, 6 left, into 3 right long, opens 30, 3 right long, tightens into sudden, turn 2 left, 50, 2 right long, tightens, into 3 left, into 3 right, 30, 4 left long, tightens and slow, 30, 6 left tightens, turn 2 left, into 3 right long, tightens, 30, 4 left of a crest, small cut maybe, 30, 3 right long, tightens 2, 30, 3 left, 60, turn 5 right, extra long, opens flat of a crest, 80, flat left of a jump, into small cut, 4 right long, into 6 left of a crest long, tightens 3, into 2 right, into 2 left long, tightens, into 5 right, tightens 4, extra long, tightens, into 4 left, and 3 left tightens, to keep right, into 6 left, and keep right into 5 left long, into 4 left tightens, 30, 4 right long, opens 30, 5 right into slight left and narrow, 4 right. Into 6 left, 3 left, don't cut to the crest, turn 2 right long, open to the crest, and keep left into 5 right small cut, 30, 4 left long, opens 40, keep right to the jump maybe into 5 left long, 50, keep left into 5 right long, open to the jump maybe, into 6 left of a jump long, into narrow, 6 right, into 5 left, extra long, opens, keep right of a big jump, to crest, into 6 left long, tightens, 70, keep left, into 5 right, very long, 50, 6 left, extra long, tightens, 3, 30, 2 right long, tightens, into 4 left, opens, into open heavy, right long, opens, into 6 left, into 5 right, into 6 left long, tightens on the crest, into 5 right long, tightens, into unseen, 2 left, extra long, opens, into 4 right, small cut, into 4 left long, opens over crest, into 6 right, 70, cut, 6 right, into 5 left long over crest, narrow, into 4 right, into 2 left tightens, into turn, 3 right, 50, flat left of a jump maybe narrow, 50 over finish, into 6 left to stop.
Hey guys, welcome to the video. Today I'm going to be starting a series that I've been asked about for quite a while on my Twitch streams, which is how to, basically my tips on how to drive different classes of cars. So today I'm going to break down in the first video in this series how to drive the 3 different classes of cars in Dirt Rally 2.0: front wheel drive, all-wheel drive, and rear wheel drive. Hope you guys like it. So for a quick little demonstration of how to drive these different classes, I'm going to go into free roam and I'm going to go to the Dirtfish Rally School, which I highly suggest for everybody starting the game to go into here, pick a car. It doesn't really matter. Whatever your favorite car is, go into free roam and just play around. You'll really get a sense of how the car is going to react and handle. And you can do this over and over and over for as long as you feel. If there's a new technique you want to learn, this is a great way to do it. I'm going to start with the Lancia because I feel that most people, this is probably going to be the car that they start playing the game with. I believe it's one of the very first cars that's unlocked. So I'm just going to give you some tips and on how front wheel drive cars handle and how to properly drive them. So we're in our menu. I'm going to go down to Tune Vehicle. I'm going to make sure, okay, this is the bone stock setup. I'm going to be doing this on all the cars today in the video. This is all the exact same setup. What you're going to want to do, well, number 1, don't kill the car. But, so obviously, you know, front wheel drive cars, they're more of a pull than they are a push like the other cars. So to get the car to oversteer around a corner, it's a little difficult. You can't really get the car to swing its weight around. You can, but it's a little difficult. It's a little bit easier on dirt. So to do that, you're going to do what's called a Scandinavian flick. And the thing with front wheel drive cars is you don't really want to counter steer with front wheel drive cars a whole lot. They don't really handle counter steering very well. They do, but they don't. So the biggest thing, and now especially for sharp corners as well, so I'll show you here. For sharp corners, they handle much better. The gearing on this car isn't exactly the best. But, so what you can do, and as you can see from my brake inputs, I should have maybe kept that in first, but they don't like to counter steer very much. So you're better off slowing down and keeping your wheels at a constant angle as opposed to where you want to go. Just like that. So with front wheel drive cars, you're not really going to be doing a whole lot of sliding. But you're just going to want to keep the wheel at a constant angle. The other thing you're going to want to do, and this goes across all classes of cars, you're going to want to just before every corner, for the most part, not every corner, you're going to want to hit the brakes so that you can balance the weight of the car forward and you can get grip to come around on your corners. Because otherwise, if you don't, what ends up happening is you lose your grip and you understeer and you plow forward. This spot right here is a really good spot to kind of get the hang of exactly how your car is going to do in a corner. The other thing with front wheel drive is you can see as I'm turning, you'll see that my throttle is not all the way depressed. Now the reason for that has something to do with the setup, and that is your differential lock. Because with the throttle fully depressed, your front differential will be fully locked, and you have more of an opportunity to basically cause your car to understeer and not grip in a corner. The other thing you can do in some shallower corners is instead of hitting the brake, I just want listen to that sound. So for some shallower corners, instead of hitting the brake, you can just let off the throttle. And that will cause enough weight to shift forward that you can still get enough of that weight transfer to go forward. Let's hop over to a rear-wheel drive car, and I'll show you the difference there. So now we're going to hop over to the Ford Escort Mark II, which, again, I'm using these cars because I assume most newer players, when you're starting out, this is probably going to be the first car in this class that you're going to buy. I believe it's also maybe the cheapest. I'm not 100% sure. So we'll load up the Ford in the Dirtfish Rally School, and I'll kind of show you how this car differs on the other end to the front wheel drive cars. Again, bone stock setup. This is exactly how the car comes from the factory, as you would say. Now these cars, especially this one, counter steering is going to be much more of a thing. These cars are much more touchy to throttle and steering inputs than the front wheel drive cars are. So with these cars, the number one thing I can suggest is learn throttle input. Because most of how this car is going to handle is completely dependent on your throttle input. Throttle input is going to be number one. And then after that, it's going to be brake input. Oop. For that exact reason right there. With these cars, you're going to want to do the same thing. You're going to want to brake in front of a corner to shift the weight forward. It's going to happen a little bit more dramatically than it did on the front wheel drive cars. And the reason for that is because as soon as you get on the gas, all that weight transfer is now on the front wheels, and it's not much on the rear wheels. And so that makes it very, very easy for the rear wheels to break traction and come around. Now, as soon as you feel the rear end start to slide back out, that's when you're going to want to counter steer. And then from there, it's simply all throttle inputs and steering inputs to maintain an angle. Another technique you can use is what's called clutch kicks. Now you can use these if you're in maybe a little bit too high of a gear, or you've got a wide angle that you want to keep that. So that's as simple as kicking the clutch. Or if you want a quick adjustment of the angle, I messed that up right there, but so like if you're coming in too wide and you want to quickly adjust your angle, this works a little bit better in hairpins than it will in some shallow corners. However, it can be applied. I do not recommend it because it's not a very controlled. Also, I should note that the difference in driving surface makes a very big difference in all of this too. So as you can see here, when I'm on this tarmac surface, you will lose grip a little bit quicker. That's going to be the biggest thing for rear-wheel drive cars, is really learning how to throw the weight around and control the weight of your car. So throttle input, brake input, and steering input are going to be the two most important things in this class of car. Also, balancing the car. Balancing the car is much more important in a rear-wheel drive, simply because all of your power is coming out of one location. You really want to make sure that your car is perfectly balanced so you can get the grip in the exact spots that you need it. Because sometimes, obviously in the straightaways, you're going to want the weight in the back of the car for the grip. And then when you're coming into a corner, you're going to want to shift that weight forward so that you can get the car to do what you want to do to get around the stage as fast as you possibly can in that drivetrain. That was your rear-wheel drive cars. Now let's go take a look at the all-wheel drive cars. All right, so now we're in the all-wheel drive Ford Fiesta in the R5 class. Again, completely stock setup, exactly as the car comes. Now this time, these are kind of an interesting mix between front-wheel and rear-wheel drive cars. So you still are going to want You're still going to want to have that weight transfer of the rear-wheel drive cars, but you're not going to have these excessive oversteer that you will with the rear-wheel drive cars. So what that means is essentially all you're going to want to do is basically point the wheels of the car in the direction you want to go. And that's pretty much it, really. That's all you're going to want to do. You're just going to want to point the wheels. If you find yourself coming in too wide, you can either let the gas off or you can tap the brakes a little bit, and that will get your car to rotate around very tightly. But otherwise, for the most part, the all-wheel drive cars are extremely easy to drive. All you really have to do is just point the wheels in the direction that you want to go. And the car will go. It's fairly simple. There's not much to it. They're very, very easy cars to drive. Now, you have two options that you can take. With how to get around sharp corners in these cars. And you can actually do it in almost every class of car. It doesn't work very well in the front wheel drive cars, but I'll show it to you right now. It's called the Scandinavian flick. So if you don't know what that is, the Scandinavian flick is basically counter steer. Oh, here, let me find a better spot for this to be used. We'll do it off this jump. So Scandinavian flick, turn away from the corner, hit the brakes, shift the weight, turn into the corner, and then get on the gas. So this is a way, if you don't want to use a handbrake, this is a way to shift the car, the weight of the car, shift the weight of the car around very quickly and get it in the direction that you want to go. So the other alternative, and these are mainly used on very tight corners. So for the handbrake, it's literally just as simple. You just pull the handbrake, car rotates around very quickly. I prefer to stay away from this unless it's a very, very sharp hairpin, because the car sometimes can become very upset and you will lose control of the car. And that's not something that you want to do going 100 miles an hour down a very narrow pathway that you're not aware of. The other thing I can recommend in free play is there's lots of these little trails that you can take. Oh, where did that trail go now? Oh, here it is. There's lots of these little trails you can take. If you want to test your reaction times, drive down those trails as fast as you feel comfortable with, and just randomly pick. Say, I'm going to turn here, and try to take that corner as fast as you can. Now, the benefit to this is it's free play. So if you crash a car, whatever, no big deal. So a tip for taking a high-speed corner like that is, as you're driving straight, simply a little bit of steering input, tap the brake to shift the weight forward, and the car will kind of bring itself around for you. You don't really have to do a whole lot. Very, very simple. So you're gonna have to kind of spend some time getting used to how the car shifts its weight, and all these things can be adjusted in setups later, but that will be a future episode where I'll kind of explain how I set up cars in certain locations. Now that we've got that done, I'm going to take these cars to a stage. We're going to put them in a real stage, and I'll kind of do a breakdown of exactly how to implement these techniques in your driving. Okay, so we've got our cars in grease. Again, bone stock setups. This is exactly how these cars were in the free play. So I'm going to demonstrate on this stage here, because there's a lot of things right away in the very beginning of the stage that are going to incorporate all those things that I talked about in the free play.
Keep left over 60, 3 left on cut. 30, slow 6 left long over crest into turn, sudden, unseen, tight hairpin right.
So we'll brake the car. Front wheel drive cars don't really do hairpins very well, so you're kind of going to have to take them slow.
Left over 60, 6 right.
So again, slow the car down, hit the brakes,
Keep left over
hold
crest
your
into
steering
sudden,
angle,
6 right.
and then lightly get back on the throttle.
Long 100.
So then for this,
Slow,
same thing.
Open hairpin right.
Just hold your angle,
Opens.
brake. You can kind of counter steer a little bit just to give yourself a little bit more angle to work with.
6 right long over crest. Into 6 left.
And going downhill, your brake inputs are going to have to change just ever so slightly because you are going much faster.
5 right over crest. 50.
Oh, I took that corner a little fast. So you can kind of use the Scandinavian flick on these cars a little bit. It doesn't work the best, but it does work in a pinch. These old cars don't really get a whole lot of grip. So this section can be a little difficult in some of these older cars.
5 left of a dip and crest, slow 50, unseen heavy left.
Now, what you could also do, which I mentioned before, if you so choose, is you can use the handbrake. I don't like to use the handbrake in older cars that didn't actually have a handbrake. That's just my personal preference on how to play. So you can do it however you want, but for me personally, I like to play the game where if the car in real life didn't have a handbrake, I don't use it in game. So however feels more comfortable for you, or however feels more fun, if you'd like an extra challenge, I would highly recommend not using the handbrake on older cars that did not have one.
Very long, tightens. Into short 6 left.
So you can see right there coming over that hump, I hit the brakes just a little bit, and that was to balance the car coming over that crest, because as you go over that crest, you're going to lose grip in the front wheels of your car, and there's a very good chance that you will miss that very sharp corner because you're just coming over a crest, and at the end of that long straight, you're going to be going very fast. So that is my tip for front-wheel drive cars in a real-life situation, and especially there's little things like that, like going over crests, you're going to want to tap the brakes. Now, let's do that exact same stage in a rear-wheel drive car, and I'll kind of show you, again, those same techniques. There's going to be a lot more counter steering, a lot more throttle modulation, much more throttle control. All right, so now we've got our Ford Mark II. Again, same thing, bone stock setup.
Go. Keep left of a 60, 3 left on cut. 30, slow 6 left long of a crest into turn sudden.
A little bit of counter steer.
Right.
Again, heavy on the brakes.
4 left long, opens.
And you can kind of use the throttle to get it around really tight hairpins like that. Again, you have to be careful, especially in these old rear-wheel drive cars.
6 right.
It's very, very easy to lose the rear end.
100. Slow, turn, open hairpin right. Opens. 100. Over crest.
Oh, I lost it. And that's why throttle control is very, very important. All of your timing on doing the Scandinavian flick in a rear-wheel drive car is very important, because if you get on the throttle just a little too early, it's very easy to lose the rear end of the car, and you'll spin exactly just the same way I did. Oh, might help if I actually caught the gear.
4, long tightens, into 4, right of a jump, opens 5, extra long, 50, 6 left, tightens, turn early, 5 over crest jump.
One other thing that you can do if you find yourself rotating too much, one of the things that I like to do
into 6 left, opens of a crest jump,
is let off the throttle, hit the clutch, downshift 1 gear. That typically will give the rear end of your car enough time to catch in the grip, and you can save yourself from spinning. In very sharp corners, you generally don't have enough time to do this. However, in some bigger corners, it will sometimes give you just enough grip to keep yourself.
Keep right of 80. 5 left of a dip and crest, slow 50, unseen heavy left.
So as you can see around some of these really tight hairpins, I'm just kind of feathering the throttle, just giving it enough to kind of pop the car around the corner and come out very, very smoothly.
And 4 right long, opens 30.
Except for that one. That one I messed the timing up on. But you have to be very, very careful. It really doesn't take a whole lot, and you can pop the car around that corner.
Left long of a crest, opens of a crest, into 6 right.
But again, you will be doing much more counter steering
6 right
in a front-wheel drive car
6 right
than you would in a front wheel.
Left 50, tight 4 left of a crest into turn 2 right tightens. opens 5, very long, tightens, into short 6 left, 30, 6 left, opens long, to keep middle of a crest, 50, keep right of a crest, into 5 left, middle of an 80, 6 right, over finish, to stop. Well done.
Much more steering corrections going on because the rear-wheel drive cars, as I said, are very sensitive to throttle inputs. And if your car is not balanced properly or at an angle that you don't want, you can very easily lose control of the car and spin. So throttle inputs are going to be the number one thing with a rear-wheel drive car. Steering, throttle, brake inputs. All of that stuff is extremely important in the rear-wheel drive cars. So now let's go to the Fiesta. We'll do that exact same stage. And you can kind of see the all-wheel drive cars are kind of a mix of the rear wheel and the front wheel drive cars. Now, all of this stuff can all change slightly depending on how your setup is. But as I said earlier, I'll cover that in a different video. You know, if that's something that you guys are interested in seeing. So if you do want to see a setup video based on the 3 different classes of cars, go ahead and drop a comment down below. Tell me that you want the setup video, and I'll make a setup video. All right, we've got our Fiesta. Same thing, stock tuning. Let's take this car out, and we'll see what we can do.
Go. Keep left of a 60, 3 left on cut. 30, slow 6 left long of a crest into turn sudden, unseen, tight hairpin right. And
now in these tight hairpins,
opens,
because this is a newer car that has a handbrake, I will tend to use it much more often. However, as I said, I do try to avoid it as much as possible because it can make the car very unpredictable.
Opens 100 over crest.
You can use it to get the initial brake in traction in the rear of the car. However, I do recommend doing the rest of the hairpin all with throttle and steering. Throttle, steering, and brake inputs.
Into 3 left, opens 4, long tightens, into 4 right of a jump, opens 5, extra long, 50, 6 left, tightens turn early, 5 over crest jump, into 6 right, very long, to keep middle of a crest, 100, downhill, slow, unseen, open hairpin left.
So again, the Scandinavian flick
6 right.
on the brakes, counter steer,
Into 6
turn in,
left, opens of a crest
get the
jump,
brake in traction with the weight
slow
transfer,
crest jump into
and
unseen,
boom,
tight
you're around the
hairpin right.
corner and going.
Keep left of a 30, 6 right,
Uh-oh.
40,
I did that a little too early. So
middle of a crest into
as I was
6
saying
left,
before, when you're
30,
going
unseen,
downhill,
left.
a lot of these things you're going to want to do early because your car is going much
17.
faster and the weight is working against you.
6 right long. To bump and
So you're going to want to do a
30,
lot of these
unseen, tight hairpin
inputs
right to
just
3.
slightly early because the
Keep
car is
right
going to be
of a 80.
falling
5 left of a dip and
as you're
crest.
doing it.
Slow 50, unseen hairpin left.
So just keep that in mind, especially in a stage like this where all these hairpins are downhill.
50 downhill, unseen, tight hairpin right. Into 6 left of a crest, and 4 right long, opens 30.
And again, throttle modulation to get yourself through that corner and keep the car rotating.
Into 4 left of a cut. 4 right and 4 left long of a crest, opens of a crest, into 6 right. Into 6 left,
Whoa.
40.
I guess they
6
didn't
right
need that sign.
30, 6 right to crest, 6 left, 50.
And again, slight
4
brake
left of a
inputs
crest
to keep the
into
car
turn, 2
balanced
right
through this
tightens.
fast section on some of these very tight,
Opens 5,
flowing
very
corners.
long, tightens, into short 6 left.
And that's going to help balance the car so that you don't end up understeering in the corner going at that speed. So just very, very slight brake inputs,
Middle of a 80,
balance the car.
6 right of a finish to stop. Well done.
So there we go. That's kind of my tips and tricks. Not necessarily tricks, I guess, but tips and techniques for driving the various classes of cars that you'll come across in Dirt Rally. You know, there may be some things that I missed. I will say front wheel drive is not my favorite class, so I don't drive them very often. I'm sure there's probably something that I missed. So if there is, let me know in the comments down below. I can always update it in a future video because I will be breaking things down more per class in later videos in the series. All right, guys, that's it for the video. I hope you really enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment what you thought. If I missed something or if you have another very specific question, be sure to type that in the comments down below. I will try to answer it as best as I possibly can. But that is it for me. Again, I'm trying to make this into a series. So, I'll be breaking things down in the future. This was just a basics on how to drive the different classes of drivetrain in the game. Later I'll break it down into per car class because they do differ. The 2000cc cars and the R5 cars and the Group A cars all have their different little differences between the two of them. Also, setups per location is another thing to keep in mind as well. But for right now, I just wanted to start it off with the different car classes as far as drivetrain are concerned. So if you have any other questions, again, be sure to type them down in the comments, or you can always catch me live on Twitch at twitch.tv/roadsidetv every Thursday playing Dirt Rally. You can always come in, ask me questions while I'm live and streaming, and I will always try my best to answer them as I play. So that's it for me, guys. Thank you for watching the video. I'll see you next time.
Hey guys, Daniel Morad here, professional GT driver, and today I'm going to give you 3 steps to perfectly set up your seating position, steering position, and pedal position to directly impact your lap time and comfort behind the simulator. The starting point for getting the perfect ergonomics on your sim rig is always with the base, the seat itself. That's where you're going to be sitting. For me personally, I race a Mercedes AMG GT3 and GT4 in real life, and I measured my seat in my race car just because I was very curious to know what the angles were, and I actually found out that it's a 38-degree angle on the base and a 52-degree angle on the back portion. And I've set the seat up in a way where it's matching within a degree of my exact race car seating position. And for me, that's so important because I want to be comfortable while I'm racing on the sim. And I want it to emulate my real car as closely as possible. So it's always about getting the sim rig as close as possible to what's comfortable for you at the end of the day, because that varies on personal preference. You can opt to use more of a prototype seating position where it will be a bit more tilted backwards, or more of a GT style seating position, like a road car GT seating position where it's tilted forward. For GT3 or GT4 cars, typically the range is anywhere from 32 degrees on the base to around 40, and then on the back it's around, I would say, 45 degrees to around 55 degrees, in that range. So definitely whatever feels more comfortable to you, you can go ahead and set your seat up like that. One of the most frequent areas where you may experience some pain would be in your lower back and your lumbar section, and that's so important because when you're braking, which we'll touch on in a little bit, there's a lot of pressure that's caused in your lower back because of you pressing against the pedal and it squeezing your back against the seat. If there is an air pocket or any space between your lower back and the back of the seat, usually that will cause a lot of extra strain, and you don't want that. So typically what you would do is, you can see in my seat, I actually have a little pad that I've added to reduce that gap on my lower back, and that just tends to support my lower back and lumbar a little bit more when I'm pushing the brake pedal hard. Once you get your seat position dialed in and you have the perfect angle for your personal preference, because remember, there's no right or wrong when it comes to seat angle, it's only a personal preference in terms of what you're looking for and what you want to achieve out of it. For me, I'm always looking to replicate my real race car, so I have my seat set up exactly like my car. Next up, once you have your seat, make sure that your shoulders are pressed to the back of the seat and inside the shoulder rest, because this is so important. If you start removing your back off the chair, then you tend to lose balance on the car. So when you're turning, you tend to wobble back and forth, especially if you have a direct drive wheel, it will move you around. So you want to make sure you're secure. This way you have the most balance and most secure grip on the wheel. Second thing is, I would say wheel position, wheel distance to you, and the angle of the wheel itself. So for me, the height and the angle go hand in hand. I have my wheel set up at around 14 degrees on the steering shaft, and that's emulating my real AMG GT cars perfectly within a degree. That's personally what I like, and I set up the height accordingly where when I'm gripping the wheel, I'm not putting any additional strain on the top or bottom of my wrist. It's actually more or less going straight from my forearm through a straight wrist onto the grip of the wheel. If you have the wheel height too high and it's too angled, you'll put additional stress on the top of your wrist. And on the other side, if you're too low and you're driving down low, you'll actually put a lot of stress on the bottom of your wrist. So you want to make sure ergonomically you're very straight and all your joints are lining up with the steering wheel. In terms of distance to the wheel, you don't want it so far away where you're coming off the seat, but you also don't want it so close where you feel like you're jammed up and you can't really make the steering inputs and your elbow is hitting the side bolster in the seat. So finding that perfect distance to where you're not jammed up or you're not reaching is important. A great way for that, to figure that out, is to put your arms out while your shoulders are in the back of the seat, wrists on top of the wheel, and your wrist should be sitting right on the top of the wheel rim. That's more or less a really good guideline to getting the proper distance for the wheel. The final step to get the perfect ergonomics in your sim racing rig would be to get the pedals set up in the right spot. And this one can be quite tricky because you need step 1 and step 2 to be correct for step 3 to fall into place. And starting right away from your knees, and we'll work down, you want to make sure that the pedals are close enough where your knees are more or less, you don't want to be quite at like a 90-degree angle, but you want to make sure that when you're going to press the brake pedal, especially, this is very important, you don't want to have a straight leg. You want to make sure you're maximizing your big muscles. So you're using your quad to press with the big pressure, and you can reserve the rest of your strength in your leg from your calf and your ankle for the finesse pressure on the brake. That's going to give you really good trail braking and that finesse at the last stage of braking when you're coming off and balancing the car in a corner. So again, no straight leg, avoid that, but you also don't want to have your knees up into the steering wheel or like too bent, because then it will start to generate some knee pain as you start to press the brake. So finding an angle, I would say you want to keep it around like 130-degree angle or so. You know, you're not 180 degrees straight legging it, but just allowing yourself to have a little bit of a bend so you can get that strength from your quad when you're pressing the brake. The second thing is your ankle position. If you feel like you're too closed off in terms of where your ankle and your foot's positioned pushing against the pedal face, it's going to cause some shin pain. So you're going to get a lot of pain in the front part of your shin. Just think about it. When you pull your toes back and your feet back, just statically, it hurts, right? It hurts in your shins. And on the other side, if you're reaching and you're trying to tippy toe it and push with the front of your toes, you're gonna get a lot of calf pain. So try to find that position where when you're squeezing, you're balancing that muscle front and back on your lower leg. So you're distributing the load across all the muscles in your leg. You don't want to just use one muscle group or one muscle area. So that's probably the best tip I can give you in terms of getting your ergonomics for your legs. The throttle is just positioning the throttle in a way where you're not reaching all the time. I know in the real race cars, sometimes I've driven cars where I'm reaching a lot, and especially if you have to blip the throttle in a manual car or sequential gearbox, it can create some massive shin splints, which you really want to avoid, and also calf spasms. So that's typically frowned upon. But yeah, always start with the knee bend, work down towards your ankle, and make sure you get the pedal position. You can adjust the tilt of your pedals either towards you or away from you, and make sure that you're using big muscle groups for big pressure situations, and reserve your smaller muscles and those quicker twitch fibers for the finesse on the brake pedal so you can hit the track, improve your lap times, and have full control of your car. Another point that's super important is alignment of your hips and your knees going down towards the pedal. You can adjust the spacing between your pedals to basically align yourself straight towards the pedal. If you feel like your pedals are off towards an angle, which sometimes it happens in real race cars, if you have, especially with a 3-pedal setup, typically the brake will be in the middle. And if you left foot brake like myself, you're more or less off to one side. But with my setup, and especially in the real car, I more or less align myself where I'm trying to hit those brakes straight on, even if I have to shimmy my whole body over so I'm hitting the brakes straight rather than being straight and angling my knees across, because that can generally generate knee pain, especially if you have a misalignment. So you always want to align your joints straight onto your controls, whether it's your steering wheel or your legs. You always want to try to find the path of least resistance and line yourself up straight with your controls. Hopefully those 3 steps help you guys set up your ergonomics for your sim rig. I know this is a hugely talked about topic, and hopefully that shed a little bit more light in terms of the correct seating position versus just everything you hear. I think coming from a professional GT driver and being able to relay my real life experience, fitting in multiple different cars, having seat fits every single year, I know exactly what it takes to get that perfect ergonomic position to be comfortable and also to feel the car and be balanced within the car as best as possible. So not only will it make you more comfortable, it's going to make you faster because you're not focused on the aches and pains. You'll be focused on hitting your marks and dropping your lap times on track.
Becoming a well-versed sim racer is hard, and there are tons of common mistakes that cost new players lap time and overall consistency. To ensure that this doesn't happen to you, I gathered the top 5 biggest beginner mistakes you should avoid in sim racing and how you easily can fix them. Welcome back to Overtake.gg. My name is Champion Joe and I'm a sim racing editor here on the platform. I have tons of playing hours on various racing sims and I wanted to help you guys avoid making the same mistakes others are making across all racing games. So let's get started with mistake number 1, and that's not using the whole track. When you're just getting started with sim racing, staying on track is usually the most important point for newcomers. As many players migrate from racing games like Need for Speed or Forza Horizon or similar titles where car control is not that really important like it is in a sim. That's why beginners tend to overdrive a car, and when they start to adjust to the handling in the sim, they focus on staying on track first, which looks a bit like this. The car staying in the middle of everything for the most part. Which isn't a bad thing at all. After all, staying on track is much better than visiting the gravel pit every 30 seconds, right? But it's not particularly fast. You see, a race car usually follows the outside, inside, outside rule, because the line, or rather the racing line you take through a corner, will determine how much speed you can carry through that turn. Simplified, this means that you will use the whole track and hug the outside while braking, steer the car to the inside where the apex of the corner lies, and when you accelerate out of the bend, you aim for the outside again to maximize your exit speed. Sounds easy, but many players do that wrong initially and struggle to perfect this craft even with this knowledge. The perfect aid to visualize where your car should be is not the ideal line you can display. No, it is the curbs. Every racetrack on the planet has them, and they show you where you should place your outside tires to maximize your grip through every corner. So when you're learning a new track, take it slow at first and have a look at the curbs available and what story they tell you. How should the perfect racing line look like? Also, don't be afraid to use all of the curbs available to you. Cut the chicane with 2 tires, let your car run wide on the curbing, on the exit, and test the limits of what's allowed and what counts as a track cut. And you will be surprised how much is actually legal to do in various racing sims. Another huge mistake you basically see in every racing game, or in F1 when Verstappen is going for a dive again, are players braking far too late for a corner. Yes, braking late will be faster into the corner, but it will most likely ruin your exit, leading to you crashing into an opponent or to your car becoming folded into a barrier. And this is where the famous sim racing saying comes into place: slow in, fast out. Which is of course a bit dramatic in its formulation, but in its core, it's the most essential racing tip you can get for bettering your corners and braking. But let's start from the beginning. When you are learning a new track and you have no clue where to brake, start to look at the side of the track to spot some markers that you can easily recognize while driving at a fast pace. This could be a tree, the start of the curbing, a line on the track, or the meter boards that solely are there for exactly this purpose. Just don't take any shadows, trust me. Then start at roughly 200 meters, for example, and see how long it takes for your car to slow down before you have to turn in. Or if you are already way too fast and overshooting the corner. Usually you adjust your braking point from there until you are as close to the turn as possible without having to break a sweat when turning in. Keep in mind that your car should flow through the turn and that if you have a lot of movement in your steering that you have to correct, you are most likely already a few meters too late on the brakes. Practice makes perfect here, and when you feel comfortable with your braking and driving overall on track, maybe search for tutorials on trail braking next, as this will further lower your braking distance in the future. But that's more of an intermediate technique and too advanced for today. But if you would like to see a video from us about that topic, let us know in the comments down below. The third mistake I see often with newer drivers that start with sim racing is that they reject any kind of help from apps or programs whatsoever because they want it to be as realistic as possible. But that's a big mistake, especially when you are playing on a 16:9 monitor and are lacking the overview that you would have in a real car. Of course, upgrading to an ultra-wide monitor, VR goggles or triple screens can help you with that, but many of us don't have the money, which is why you should get all the help you can get from nifty programs. And there are many good ones out there. You should definitely consider getting a car radar. It shows you the cars around you, which will help dramatically to stay safe in side-by-side situations on track and to keep you cool under pressure. And there's even a program that can help you with your overview while also making you feel like you are still playing by the rules of the real world. This program is called Crew Chief, a free tool that will act as an engineer and spotter by radio. It can call you by your name, tell you when other cars are alongside you, and also will respond to voice commands if you ask it something. For example, you are driving in an online race, you have all the HUD elements turned off for the complete immersion and want to know what your position on track is, you can just ask, "What's my position?"
P15.
What an awesome tool. Everybody should use it. A link can be found, of course, in the video description. Mistake number 4 is a big one and treated with a technique that real racing drivers have to learn as well to adjust to the speed and to the low reaction times. Because for many beginners in sim racing, their vision while driving is incorrect. Usually when driving a car in real life, for example when driving through a city, the vision of the driver sits right in front of the car. You observe everything that's happening right in front of you, like traffic signs, construction sites, road markings, or people crossing the street. Because your speed is lower, when you spot something you have to react to. Like when approaching a corner, you have more than enough time to react to it. In a racing scenario, this is different. Your speeds are way higher and the time you have to react accordingly is much lower, which is why we have to adjust our vision to spot the next important point where your car should steer to. So when you're approaching a corner, your eyes should already focus on the apex coming up, so you can react in just the right time to start turning your wheel towards it. And I know, what about the braking point? How can I spot the braking point and have my eyes on the apex at the same time? Easy, you have to use your peripheral vision. Spot your brake marker with the corner of your eye, focus on the apex, and as soon as you arrive there, your eyes should already be focused on the exit ahead so you can take the ideal line out of the turn. This takes a while to practice and to get used to, but will better your lap times massively as well as your consistency. The best example I can give you are Eau Rouge and Radillon at Spa-Francorchamps, which are so much easier to master with this technique. Because the speed here is so high and the time to hit the perfect moment to start steering is so slim that every millisecond counts. So by having your eyes already on the inside while driving down into Eau Rouge makes it way easier to get out on the other side in one piece and to avoid cutting the track while doing so. Our last tip has to do with your attitude. What's your motivation to go racing? Only to win? Then get ready for a bumpy ride. Because compared to other esports titles out there, everybody on track is on their own and you are the only player in your team. Winning is always a 1 versus 20, 25 or even more situation. So if your only goal is to win every race, you will most likely get disappointed and lose interest in the hobby super quickly. My tip is to be your own rival and to find joy in the racecraft. Because every race is also a competition against your past best. Try to maximize your pace when you are driving without anyone around, alone in a race in P10 for example. Use the Delta display to shave off tenths each lap and to always be your best self, even though people around you might be way faster. Also learn to enjoy racing and not only overtaking, but also clean defending and long battles on track without contact with your opponent. If you start to value those situations, online racing will become the best possible experience you can have. If the outcome of battles is not as important than the battle itself, you can fully savor the moment without being disappointed if you only come home 13th in the end of a race. Of course, I'm not saying that you shouldn't try to be the best guy on track, that's also a lot of fun. But it's not the only thing that makes racing exciting. So keep your heads up, keep your fights as clean as possible at all times and just try to enjoy yourself. What are your tips you would pass down to a beginner? Let me know in the comments down below. But that's it already from me today. Thank you so much for tuning in and see you next time around. Cheers!
Figured it might be easier just to make a video. So, view settings. Oh wait, no, it's in the driving menu. View settings. Height I have at 2.9. I don't know how good you can see that. Maybe if I would stop slapping my head around. Lateral 0. Distance 8.9. So usually though, what I do, because it is probably going to be different in the Lexus, but what I generally tend to do is just watch my left bezel there, and I put the A-pillar there. It depends on the car. It doesn't always work out well, because sometimes that'll make you way too far in, but I do like to get that A-pillar over in there. That usually tends to be about the right distance. You can measure like you're supposed to, but I usually don't. Field of view I have at 58 degrees, which is going to be set in your triple settings, and then pitch 0. Motion, I have all that stuff off. I hate that stuff. I'm not real sure what this is. I think that has to do with lock with wheel, but I have that off too. I don't like it to be dancing around while I'm driving. If you have a single monitor, it's fine, because I mean it helps you to see a little bit more, but I hate it personally. I also don't like to see the wheel. I've got a wheel here, I don't need to see it on the screen, so I turn that off, but that's again personal preference. Mirror FOV, which I guess it will affect this one. I think that's more for the in-game mirror. I don't know. Anyways, 90, 15 scale, and then zeros on the other. So this is probably the main one. This I did measure to my head, so you probably know this already. It's from the center of the screen to your eye. I think 550 millimeters is around 24 inches, I'm pretty sure. And then so I measured this, which I think you have 32s as well, and the bezel is effectively 0. Yours is going to be a little more if you didn't. I don't know if those strips I sent you worked or not. They were kind of small, so if they didn't work, that's probably why. But essentially it's 0 if you're using these. Otherwise, you need to measure the distance and then you put that in the bezel width. But 70 millimeters. And then my angle, I didn't get a protractor out. I just sort of guesstimated at 60 and looked to see, you know, where it looked the best when I changed it. But 60 seems to be the number that looks the best for me. And you can kind of see, like when you change it, it wings it way out and it makes it look stupid if you go too far. And then like if I go into 55 or something, I don't know, maybe it looks better. It's hard to say. I've just been driving at 60 forever and it seems to kind of be pretty close. It may be off a little bit. I didn't do any math or anything, but I think the main one is distance from the screens, which is essentially going to do the same as your seat distance. The way I understand it, except seat distance moves you forward in the car, and if you change the FOV, it actually warps things. So you want to have the FOV correct and then move the seat distance and then the screen width. So that's probably, I'm guessing the screen width might be why you can't see your mirrors, but that's also another test that I do. Like if I get in a car and set it to the A-pillar in the bezel there, and I can't see this mirror, then I'm done, because why have triples? So I want to be able to see out of this window and this window for sure. Whether or not that's like absolutely perfect field of view or not, I definitely want to be able to see out of these two windows, because that's the reason I bought triples. Anyway, that may have been more than what you were looking for, but that's my settings.
Does this look normal to you? Then you're probably doing it wrong. But don't worry, help is on the way. In this video, we'll take a look at camera settings in Sims and give you all the tools you need to get this part of your life back in order. What's up everybody and welcome to the Sim channel. Yes, I'm aware there's a bunch of good sim racing FOV videos out there already, and I'll link a few in the description. But there are a few aspects to this topic that I feel have not yet gotten the attention they deserve. This video will be a bit more technical and less about the supposed effects of good camera settings that I feel have been covered enough in other videos before. So let's get into it, and hopefully by the end of this video you'll be all set to join the FOV police. The field of view, or FOV, is the viewing angle of the in-game camera and should ideally be set to match the viewing angle you have of the picture on your physical screen. To illustrate this, let's have a look at what happens when it isn't, or in other words, what we get if we squeeze a wide in-game field of view into a much narrower one on the screen. One thing we notice is that the width and height of the car in front of us is reduced while its length is maintained. This distortion makes it more difficult to correctly judge the position of your car relative to other objects in the world, such as curbs, walls, and other cars, and makes it more difficult to place the car exactly where you want it. The next turn may seem miles away when it's already time to hit the brakes. As a consequence, your lap times and safety rating may suffer from a wrong FOV setting, and it also gets in the way of immersion. Of course, the sense of speed is higher with a wider field of view, but it comes at a pretty steep cost. What you want to achieve is for the bezel of your monitor to act like a window frame into the virtual world with a 1:1 scale and all angles being maintained. To calculate the correct field of view setting for your setup, you first need to know the size and aspect ratio of your screen and measure the distance of your eyes from the screen. You can then either put those numbers in an FOV calculator, links in the description, or do the math yourself. Or you can use the ultimate FOV table brought to you by the Sim channel. You'll find the link in the description below. One thing that's helpful to know is that some games use the vertical field of view, that is, the angle between your eyes and the top and bottom of your screen, while others use the horizontal field of view, which is the angle between your eyes and the left and right edges of your screen. And then there's a few weird ones that use different measures, for which you're gonna have to look up the conversion factor. Anyway, let's quickly go through the math. Let's say our eyes are at a distance V away from a screen with a diagonal D. To get the correct field of view setting, we first need the width and or height of the screen depending on whether we want to calculate the vertical or horizontal field of view. You can measure that with a tape measure or calculate it from the diagonal and aspect ratio of your screen. To calculate it, use either Pythagoras or trigonometry. I'm putting the calculations on screen so that you can reproduce them with your numbers. Now that we have the height and width of our screen, let's calculate our horizontal field of view, which in this illustration is 2 times alpha. We get alpha by taking the arctangent of half the screen's width w divided by our distance from the screen v. Multiply alpha by 2 for your correct horizontal field of view setting. For the vertical field of view, it works in exactly the same way, using the height of the screen instead of its width. And to everybody who fell asleep during this section, you can wake up now, math class is over. On a triple screen setup, if all 3 of your screens are the same size, and you have the center of the screens pointing directly at your eyes, you'll have the same field of view for all 3 screens, so the calculation remains the same. Theoretically, all that needs to be done should be to set the correct viewing angle for the additional left and right cameras in-game. Unfortunately, not all games have proper support for triples built in, but that won't be our concern in this video. If you're using VR, the FOV should be set to the correct values for your HMD automatically, and you don't need to worry about it. But wait, there's more! The camera's viewing angle isn't the only thing that should be set up correctly. The one setting that for some reason many even seasoned sim racers apparently don't really care about is the correct height of the horizon. It should be common sense that the horizon on a sphere should be slightly below eye level, but how far below? To answer this, yeah. So here's the Earth and here's us. For the purpose of this illustration, I made us relatively tall, but we'll use more realistic numbers in the calculation. Well then, how far below our eye level is the horizon? The horizon is found by placing a tangent to the Earth that goes through our eyes. Thus, how far we can see and how far below eye level the horizon is depends on the radius of the Earth and how far above the Earth's surface our eyes are positioned. Ultimately, we're looking for this angle and we'll name it alpha. Let's construct a triangle between the center of the Earth, our eyes, and the horizon, with of course a right angle at the horizon. We'll call this angle beta, and we see that alpha and this angle are the same since both are 90 degrees minus beta. We can thus calculate alpha by taking the arc cosine of r divided by r plus x. Let's say the Earth has a radius of 6,371 kilometers and our eyes are 1 meter above the ground while seated in a race car. The resulting angle alpha is 0.032 degrees, so about 1/30th of a degree. Now, if your screen is 1 meter away from your eyes, this 1/30th of a degree translates to half a millimeter. That's how far below eye level the horizon should be, or in other words, just set it to eye level. To get it there, you'll have to adjust the camera pitch setting in-game if the game has a pitch setting. And if it doesn't, just send an angry email to the game's publisher. Or Google how to set it up. Back on topic, why is it important to have the horizon placed correctly? To be honest, I don't think this is going to make it much faster, but it's just really weird to look up at the screen like the first row in the cinema and still look down on the hood of your virtual car. Just don't do that. To be fair, I realize that the correct FOV settings aren't always an option. You may have installed your screen on top of your wheelbase so that your eye level is almost at the bottom of the screen, and putting the horizon to that level might take parts of the road out of the frame. In that case, you may want to place your screen behind the wheelbase to set it lower and get the horizon in the correct position, but that's also not always an option. Or your screen may be rather small or far away and there is nothing you can do about it. In that case, it makes sense to set the FOV to a reasonably low value that still allows you to see what you need to see, even if it's not the quote-unquote correct FOV setting. Being just a few degrees off isn't really all that dramatic. Of course, if you're racing in a living room setup with the screen a few meters away from you, there's just not a lot you can do unless you can get closer to the screen. If that doesn't work, VR could be an option. And with that said, I hope you learned something useful today. Now pull out that tape measure and calculator, punch those numbers in, and get right into your favorite sim to be amazed at the difference that a correct FOV setting can make. Or, if your FOV is already set up correctly, join the FOV police and shame other sim racers into rethinking their camera settings while enjoying your intellectual superiority. This video will also serve as your way of handing out a ticket to anybody you see committing an FOV violation online. Just put a link to this vid wherever you see a wrong FOV setting, with no further explanation required. But first, hit like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Also, check out the Sim channel on Instagram for some behind the scenes stuff and to keep up to date with what I'm up to. You'll find a link in the description below. And that'll be it for today. I hope you have a wonderful time and see you in the next video.
Have you recently had this same problem? You're giving it everything you could do, and you still can't keep up with those aliens out there? Don't worry, because it's me, Jardier, here again on Overtake channel with another Assetto Corsa Competizione tutorial, how to practice like a pro. Lately, I feel that practice becomes more and more important. Racers are preparing way better compared to how it was some years ago. That's why your test runs should be as good as possible. As good as possible is a good way to start. Let's say you join a server and somebody is driving 155 on Nürburgring, but every lap you do is 2 or 3 seconds slower. Then I would recommend you to spectate them. But it is just a little harder than watching. You have to take a close look. Most people are just watching and casually watching instead of trying to learn something new from them. If you want to learn even more from watching, make sure to subscribe and ring that bell for Overtake channel so you don't miss any notification with the tutorial from me. But let's go back to the practice. A common thing others could do better than you is the shifting. Especially in the mid-speed corners, the difference in gears can be huge. The fastest guy on the server might be taking them in the second gear while you stay in third. This is not automatically faster at every corner, but could be a factor for specific turns. A good example could be a Les Combes at Spa, where you will find exactly this situation. Some drivers will take this turn in third gear when you should actually take it in a second. Something that is also very good to observe is the lines fast racers take. Remember, you can always be in a better position on the track. Maybe you take too much curb or don't use enough of the racetrack. A good test, if your lines are not good, is to pick one of or 2 corners where you and the fastest person have different lines and try to be more creative there. If it helps you gain a fraction of the time, you may just want to adjust your lines. If you believe it or not, feedback can be extremely helpful for you for your evolution as a sim racer. It can help you extremely in the short term or overall with your practice. So let's check it out. Let's say you have a really hard time to keep your tires until the end of the race. They are always worn down and you struggle for the grip shortly before the end. This, of course, can have a lot of reasons, but that's why it's important to show someone your replay. Maybe it appears obvious to them that you are just too aggressive while overtaking, cornering, braking, which ruins your rubber. Something that can seem small to you, but it can be a big mistake for the others. Of course, there are always different opinions on racing, but I think it's very good to have someone close to you who can give you some tips and information so you can do stuff differently. If you think about it, could you give me a description of your driving style? Probably not, because most what we do happens without you noticing. We don't think about it, but it's important to make us aware how we drive. This is something very common that we do in a self-improvement. Like, we do some things all over and we do them automatically later. But it's good sometimes to take like a step back, you know, look at each other from like a different perspective and learn from that, because that's how you can improve. I had a friend I was helping and he would do the same thing every time. In Imola, he was driving just fine, but one thing was missing. He didn't use the whole racetrack. His lines were either too narrow or not tight enough. This led to him losing a lot of time. When I told him about it, he started watching his own replays from another angle. This ultimately led him to see what I see, and he got a lot better over the following practices. Of course, this also ties you to the feedback you get, but you can also do this feedback yourself. If you look at yourself critically, if you look at some of the bad habits you actually have, you can improve a lot there. Something you want to ask yourself as well is how much should I actually practice? There's definitely no wrong or right there, but let me tell you something from my own experience. Last year, I was desperately trying to learn the McLaren, as I told you in a previous braking tutorial. There was a race coming up and I had some time to practice, so I thought I would really go hard in one day. After like 6 hours of practice, I just couldn't improve. I felt like I was just completely stuck. My mood was terrible as well. It was pointless to practice anymore that day. I went to sleep and the next day I woke up. I did on a second lap my personal best by almost 2:10. Since that day, I value the shorter practice times more highly, because you give your mind time to reset, and it's very, very important in a very hard practice to put your practices in a shorter amount of time in more days if you're able to. Something that is very useful for very high-end esport level of practices, or if you want to really find out what is wrong with you, is the Motec or telemetry. Telemetry are graphs that show you what parts of your car do at which time. If you look at our third Hero's Journey episode, you can see how it can help beginners and experts. Let's give you a short example from me again. Last year, me and my teammates were practicing for an esports event, and I was not seeing any progress at the Nürburgring. I was constantly slower by 0.2 of a second, and I couldn't do anything about it. So I begged and sent everything over to my colleague, who knows a lot about telemetry and stuff around it. He made me aware that I am overheating the tires and getting a lot of heavy understeer in the first sector because I'm using tiny bit of throttle at the same time as I'm braking. I would never thought my so-called rally style, when I'm always on the throttle and brake at the same time, would cause me to lose actually a time. But here it was a massive problem, specifically with the McLaren on the Nürburgring. So I had to relearn everything, and literally in my second run, I improved the time and I matched my teammate's pace, which just mind blew me away. The only downside of the telemetry is you need to learn how to read it. It's a lot of graphs and a lot of information which you need to get through. Would you like to have some tutorial for like telemetry on Overtake channel? Make sure to let me know in the comments, guys, and we can figure it out. Practice is as important as the race itself. If you don't know yourself or the car you are driving, you don't have a chance at being good. It is obvious that you need to drive in order to be better, but stuff like feedback, practice times, and being critical to yourself don't come to mind immediately. Be sure to take a practice seriously. Be critical of yourself, watch the replay properly, maybe ask your friends or communities to give you a proper feedback as well. If you have someone who can read telemetry, well, that's already a win for you. For more racing and esports content, make sure to check Overtake GG. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe under this video. Share the video with your friends and communities as well to help them improve. And I hope to see you guys next time. My name is Jardier, and see you guys on the next Overtake video.
Hey guys, today I want to go through a few tips that should help you become become faster on a new track in a shorter period of time by following just a few rules of thumb really that should apply to any track on which you run with the GT3. Most simple thing is thinking about Monza T1 first as a good example. This is most likely the straight where the cars are going the fastest, followed most likely by the slowest corner afterwards in comparison, which means the speed delta from Vmax on the straight to Vmin in the corner is the largest on Monza. I think that we have on any track in ACC. At least I can't think of another corner that is as extreme. Maybe Mount Panorama, 280 something on the end of the straight, but the corner afterwards is not as slow as Monza T1. It's quite a bit quicker, so the speed delta there might not be as harsh, so the braking point could probably be a tiny bit later. Anyway, back to Monza. And in turn 1, with any GT3, no matter if the cars are